Welcome to the American Citizens Abroad podcast. Today we're chatting with Dr. Amanda Klekowski von Koppenfels of KvK Pathways, who is also the primary academic expert on U.S. citizens living abroad and continues her research as well as launching her coaching business. Welcome, and thanks for chatting with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
The last time we chatted, it was 2020. For those who missed that episode, could you share with us your journey as an expat? Could you walk us through your relocation story? What motivated you to move overseas? And how did you navigate your way into building a life abroad?
We're going to have to talk another day about that difference between expat and migrant or immigrant. That is a whole podcast episode in and of itself. So maybe we can do that later on. So I'll just skip over that. The first time I moved to Europe was actually in 1981 as a child. My dad was a professor on sabbatical in Germany. I was put into local school and I learned to speak German pretty much like a native. We went back to Germany twice more. And then again, still with my parents, I also lived in Poland and in England. And in migration scholarship, we know that having lived abroad before is a really strong predictor of moving abroad again. And that just makes sense, right? It's no longer a complete unknown. So when my PhD research took me in the direction of Germany, it was natural for me to spend some time there. I'd already lived there for 3 years. And it was also a core component of my PhD program. But having said that, when I moved to Germany as an adult doing research for that PhD, I realized that my German was that of a child. And there was a bit of a learning curve moving my German from a child up to that of a professional academic adult. And that was 29 years ago. And I've been in Europe ever since. And how that happened was just before I was about to head back to the U.S. to finish writing up my PhD and apply for jobs in the U.S. I was invited to dinner and I met a guy. I used to think my story was romantic and unique. But then when I wrote my book on U.S. citizens in Europe, I realized it might still be romantic, but it was definitely not unique. More on that in a second. We've been married 26 years now, and my professional and personal life has taken me through Germany, through Switzerland, and Belgium, where we've now lived for over 20 years. And of course, for most of that time, I've been studying the experiences of U.S. citizens living abroad. And my 2014 book, Migrants or Expats, Patriots, Americans in Europe, is still the primary book exploring the experiences of overseas Americans. And chapter 5 in that book talks a bit about me, actually talks about me in various points, but my experience and that of a lot of people I interviewed for the book led me to coin the term the accidental migrant. And that refers to many of us who went abroad for a temporary period and ended up staying. And that's something that U.S. citizens have in common with many, many other nationalities and countries around the world. Today, it's a bit different. U.S. citizens are moving abroad with more intention than before, and that's a change over the past years. I think during the Vietnam War, people moved with a similar intentionality. But even then, as now, folks were also continuing to move to study, to be with a partner, to retire, and to work abroad. Today, we are seeing an additional impetus for moving, but it does not seem to be replacing what we know to be the existing reasons for migration.
Professionally, socially, and personally, what were the biggest surprises for you as an American abroad?
Well, professionally, I've never really worked in the U.S. as an adult. I worked for the local library in Massachusetts, then at Harvard. I worked for the Courier House superintendent. He's said to be the inspiration for the character groundskeeper Willie on The Simpsons. And I can see it. I was a teaching assistant in grad school at Georgetown, and I temped in the summers in D.C. My professional transition was a bit different than it is for a lot of folks. And for personally and socially, it was a bit of a slow burn since I did not intentionally move to Europe as a permanent migrant. I initially went as a doctoral student. So I acted as a student. I was working hard. I was enjoying going out with friends, traveling, exploring, learning new things. And in retrospect, it was pretty superficial because I did not have access to the deeper levels of society. But I also didn't yet have the mindset that this was a place I was going to be in permanently. And I think that really makes a difference how you look at it. When you're just there temporarily, there's less pressure on you to adapt and learn the ropes. So I enjoyed the novelty of it all. Then very quickly after that, I was a newlywed and a young mother, and that took all my focus. And by then we were in Brussels, which is a gloriously messy city with so many different language and national communities. But I think the main thing that pops out for an American moving to Europe is just how very different social interactions and traditions are. I think we tend to think that there's a connection between the U.S. and Europe, and of course there is. But there's a lot more difference than might initially pop out. And that's something to be really aware of and work through. There were a number of surprises for me. And actually, if I think about it, I think almost all of them were on the basis of an assumption. I had assumed that something would be a certain way. I encourage clients to really keep an open mind, to ask questions, and to learn. I think that is one of the key elements in living abroad successfully.
Having raised two bicultural and trilingual children in a multi-country context, what are some lessons you picked up about family life abroad that you might share with American families considering the move?
One of the main points is that kids are far more resilient than people tend to think. I was 10 when we first moved to Germany, and I picked up German pretty easily. I apparently still have the local accent. My own kids were born here in Brussels, and we raised them bilingually at home, English and German, and they had French at school and in activities, and they're friends from all over. As they were growing up, we celebrated Halloween and Thanksgiving, and we kept a clear sense of identity as being American and also as German. And I think that was important. Integrating, settling in is absolutely crucial. It was less of an issue for my kids since they were born here, but also based on my own experience as a child. In addition to settling in, it's also important to maintain that clear sense of home and identity. You are never going to integrate 100%. Maybe in the high 90s, if we can quantify it that closely, I don't think we can. But it's really key to maintain a sense of who you are. It's often a hybrid, and that's certainly our situation. And a lot of migration research shows this as well. The other thing to understand is that even if you'd really love to, you're not going to be able to replicate things for the kids exactly as they were in the United States. And that's okay. Trying to replicate things as closely as possible to the U.S. is going to be a real challenge. And ultimately, it may well backfire. Kids do want to do what their friends are doing. And it is a balancing act for kids and for parents. Being flexible and reevaluating how things are going is really key.
You support clients with both the practical and emotional sides of relocation. What tends to be the largest emotional hurdle for Americans moving abroad?
There's a lot of variation there. Some folks are moving for retirement and they're excited for a relaxing and more affordable life in warm weather. Others are moving to study for a new job, or they're moving as a digital nomad, intending to move around. But there's one group of people who really stand out, and that's those folks who don't actually want to move. They feel they have to. And that's something that's new in the past year. And that's difficult, understandably, right? It's one thing to look forward to retiring in a more affordable place or being excited to explore a new country, but it's another to feel that you have to leave your home, your community. And that's something that folks need to work through. I see relocation consultants offering the fastest or the easiest visa, and I totally understand the sense of urgency some folks are feeling, and that's absolutely not to be dismissed, right? It is absolutely legitimate. But at the same time, some folks who are moving in fear and only moving by what we call in migration push factors, they haven't thought through what they need to thrive. The focus on survival, again, completely legitimate and understandable, but thriving is also key because as urgent as things might feel at the moment, there's really far more at stake than just getting out as quickly as possible. And that's life beyond the immediate. And that's where it can actually really help to work with a coach to uncover the other elements of life abroad. And that needn't slow down the relocation process. It should be a core component of it. Where are you going to have the best chance of succeeding and being able to stay long term? Because there are stories of folks either moving from one country or another in search of a place that works for them, or even of moving back to the United States. And that's something that preparation, and not just of the logistical kind, can really help to avoid this. One of the things that in this whole discussion about relocating overseas, not everybody is going to be able to move. In migration research, we talk about aspirations and capabilities. Folks who have the aspiration to move abroad or don't have the aspiration to move abroad, and then people who have the ability or capability of moving abroad, and then those who don't. And ultimately, not everybody is able to move, and not everybody wants to move. And I think that's something that is really also key to think through.
What are some of the most overlooked logistical issues Americans should think about before moving abroad?
There's a lot of logistics involved in this, right? And in my coaching practice, I work at the intersection of coaching and advice. I have now lived abroad myself for over 30 years. And I did that as a child with my parents. I did it as a student. I've done it as an adult. And of course, I've studied overseas Americans experiences for about 20 years. So I have this sort of enormous amount of information and insight to share on those logistical issues. And of course, there's a lot, right? There's finances, there's taxes, there's housing, schooling, visas, employment, healthcare, in addition to all of the aspects of settling in. And there are a ton of guides out there about what to look at. Most of them have errors in them. ACA is a great resource, but I have seen a number of errors. Yes, you do need to file tax returns. No, you often don't pay tax. But I think the most overlooked logistical issues are probably the local ones that don't make it into guides. And those might be on even a neighborhood level, right? Sort of what are habits in your neighborhood that you can run afoul of. And that's where getting into local networks, whether it's of natives, of folks from the area, of recent arrivals, whether U.S. citizens or others, and that's really helpful. And then that takes us into settling into a new place. And I think that's something that, in addition to the logistics that people think through, coaching is really, really key. And coaching asks powerful, informed, and appropriate questions. And some things to think about before departure, in addition to all the logistics, is how flexible are you? How open are you to new experiences? It's absolutely fundamental to understand yourself and understand the dynamics of your family as you look into starting a new life abroad. Because moving abroad is not just about leaving one situation. It's about moving into another. And that situation is going to be hard. There's the initial excitement, and then that gets followed by overwhelm as you're trying to do things like set up a bank account, finalize the visa, all these little details that suddenly need to be worked out. And after that initial host of logistical things and trying to figure out, what's in the grocery store, then you get into the excitement of the adventure and the exploration and it's great fun. Often what happens, just traditions working through it, is that reality rears its head again. And you realize there's something no one warned you about, like it being forbidden to use the washing machine on Sundays or to mow the lawn on Sundays, and more profound things than that, right? And this phase can go on for a while. And that's where it can be really challenging. Then you do come to this stage of adjustment and acceptance. And getting through these phases can be really challenging. It's helpful to have community and resources to work through them. One thing to remember is that this is all perfectly normal. For some folks, though, that sudden realization that this is more than you'd bargained for is just too much, and they do go back home or move to another country. And one way to avoid that is to put in some of the hard work at the beginning of the process. Be aware that hard times are going to be ahead and think through how you're going to cope with them. How resilient are you? How can you increase resilience? With resources, people to talk to, coping strategies. Some folks prepare for every eventuality with extensive research. And if that makes you feel in control, that's great. I'm a researcher myself, and I believe strongly in having data and information. I don't think you can make decisions based on assumptions, and I believe having the data and having the information is key. But ultimately, for everyone, even with absolute tomes of research, there's going to be a moment of the unknown or a challenge, and preparing yourself to deal with that emotionally is really, really important.
For your clients who are doing career coaching or student mentoring abroad, what patterns do you see in terms of what works and what doesn't when transitioning professionally or academically in a new country?
I'm working with people who are looking for jobs in Europe and who are applying to PhD programs. And something that I think really makes a difference is an openness to new approaches, to understanding that this is a new ballgame and that new rules can and do apply. And that's something that prepares them for success. Learning what is crucial in new settings. Cover letters and CVs are structured differently, for one thing. There are many other things, but learning that you have a lot to learn, no matter how experienced you are in your job, is the first step. And then researching the components of that is the next one. And again, being prepared that this is a new situation. I work a lot with folks applying to PhD programs, and then I support them through their PhDs. In my academic life, I've supervised over 20 PhD students to completion and over 300 master's students, advising them in their master's dissertations. And one thing that's different about European programs, both master's and PhD, is that they often don't provide the same sort of support that U.S. programs do. And they are a fraction of the cost. So that's something that is a significant difference also. And so my additional supervision is something that fills that gap. But being aware that all of these are different animals and that it is going to be an adaptation process and that it does take a lot of work. All of those are really key things to think through.
How do you recommend Americans maintain or rebuild their professional network when abroad, especially if their field credentials came from the U.S.?
So a couple things. One is that there is a question of recognition of qualifications, and that's a process you can go through. It's pretty straightforward, except for people who are in licensed professions such as being a lawyer, being a doctor, a psychiatrist, teacher. It can either be not possible, or it can require several years of retraining, or there are other ways to think about it. And thinking much more broadly is something that for the vast majority of people is really, really key. So many skills and much experience that people have is transferable, but step back from it. Rather than referring back to the specific local context you're working in, think about the broader skills and how they transfer to the context you're applying to. What skills do you bring with you that are unique? And these could be technologies or approaches that have been pioneered by you, your company, or in the US, and are just starting to be used in Europe. And these are going to be different across fields, right? Could be a new software, could be a new technology, could be a new just approach, could be a new way of thinking about things. Years ago, when I was doing interviews for my book, I interviewed a couple of folks who were fundraisers in London, and they were hired by NGOs. The Brits at that point, and still now, were not anywhere as far along as the United States in terms of fundraising. And so folks who had fundraising skills from the United States were able to use those and apply those in jobs in the UK because they were bringing in skills that were special, that were unique, were new. Step back and look at your experience from a bit of a distance rather than only at the detail. You also have native English. You might have another native language. And these are skills. These are things that you can apply. So it's about rethinking and repurposing your CV almost. LinkedIn is also important. You can build networks there, and you can let LinkedIn know sort of behind the scenes. You don't need to say it publicly, but it can be behind the scenes that you're looking for jobs in X or Y country, and start seeing what those jobs are requiring. What is it that they're looking for? How do you present yourself so that you are able to use the skills that you have in another context?
Living across multiple countries often raises questions of identity, belonging, and home. How do you help your clients navigate these inner questions, especially when they feel in between countries, cultures, or professional identities?
Oh, that's a great question. What is home? I talk about going home to Massachusetts, but then I also talk about coming back home to my house in Brussels. Home is a tough one. And I think we have multiple homes, right? Academic research shows us that we all have multiple identities and that those identities are contextual. I have quite a bit of stature in many situations, but when I'm stumbling through Dutch in a store, and my Dutch isn't as strong as my French, and Belgium, of course, is bilingual, well, actually trilingual with German, but then I'm just another immigrant trying to accomplish a transaction. I don't have the kind of stature that I do in other contexts. And that's something that they'll remind people that even without moving abroad, we all have multiple identities. I mean, you could think of a married lawyer who has children. She is going to be, a tax expert in a courtroom. She's going to be a partner in a marriage with her husband, and she's going to be a mom to her kids. She has all of those identities at the same time, but given the context, any one of those is going to come to the fore. And that's something that adding in another culture sort of enriches that whole mixture. But it's not immediately obvious that that is an enrichment, that's for sure. It can feel really, really confusing. I used to follow the Red Sox and the Patriots, often staying up all night to watch games. I remember a bunch of us got together to watch the Red Sox win the World Series for the first time in, 86 years. I don't do that anymore. Part of that's probably age, since I don't cope with all-nighters as well as I used to. But part of that is also having been away 30 years. And sports in the United States is something that has faded in significance for me, and I'm okay with that. I do continue to follow politics and the news quite closely. I'm a political scientist, right? When I work with people on this question, they do often end up deciding that their multiple identities are a win and not a drawback. And others find they need to make conscious decisions to step away from some aspects of the United States and step toward others. It's a really individual process, but it is something that is extraordinarily important.
And related to this, for Americans whose sense of home has shifted or is shifting abroad, what advice do you give them around maintaining ties to the U.S. while fully embracing a new country?
This is a topic that comes up a lot in migration scholarship, and decades of research really do show that it is entirely possible to have a strong dual identity and be connected to two places. A really key question is, what is important to you? Some folks come from a tradition where Thanksgiving is simultaneously a family reunion. So if you don't have kids in school, plan to go back to the U.S. for that Thanksgiving. If you do have kids in school or you really can't get back, I know plane fares can be expensive. Create Thanksgiving where you're living. Make a family side dish favorite. Do a family tradition. Years ago, my then roommate and I made walnut turkeys. We had so much fun. That was her family tradition. And we replicated that in Berlin. In Brussels, we've celebrated Thanksgiving on the Saturday after Thanksgiving for years with our friends in Brussels and even from further afield. Of the years that I have been abroad, there's only been 1 year I didn't celebrate. And that was my first year abroad as a graduate student. And I really missed it. And I swore I would never miss it again. And then for other things, when I first came abroad, there was only an imperfect Skype and really expensive phone calls. For staying in touch, we now have WhatsApp, we have Signal, we have Zoom, we have many, many ways of staying in touch with friends and family. But I think something that is key is to make conscious choices. Be aware of how you stay in touch in the U.S. and how you settle in abroad, and as abroad becomes home.
For Americans already living abroad who are facing a crossroads like a career change, relocation within a country, family decisions, or returning home, what questions should they ask themselves to clarify their move?
I'd ask them what's important to them. I mean, this is a theme, I realize I keep saying it, but it's significant. And it can take some work to uncover that. It's very often not immediately obvious. There are so many messages coming at us from so many perspectives, each telling you what's absolutely crucial for you. And it can be hard to identify what your own thoughts, priorities, and concerns are. Some folks leave Europe and head back to the U.S. when they have kids because they have a large extended family and want their children to experience that. Others decide to stay in Europe when they have kids because of good maternity leave, cheaper childcare, and good health care. And so what's important to you? It may not be what people are suggesting you do. Deciding what's important to you is really key. And it may not be what people are suggesting that you do. And there are often many components to what's important to you. And identifying each of those can really help make that decision. And finally, if there's something you think you should do, explore why that's the case. Get the data and the information. Don't make decisions based on assumptions, but break those assumptions down. If it's a financial question, make sure you have the data. Make sure you know what's going on. Don't make decisions based on assumptions or what other people are telling you to do, but sit down, work through it, talk through it, and make a decision based on data and information and what is important to you and to your family.
And what have you found helps people not just survive, but thrive in a new country and culture, rather than always feeling like a visitor?
Well, doing your homework beforehand is important. And it sounds silly, but weather is really, really key. The dark part of the year has started in Northern Europe, and that is a deal breaker for some people. Don't move to a country where the weather is going to make you absolutely miserable. So a bit of preparation ahead of time is really key. And that's something that don't just go for the easiest or quickest visa, but think through what it is about that country that will work for you. And then learning the language is really, really key. Without language, you're always going to be a little bit out of step. In order to learn language, getting engaged in activities is important. For folks with kids, meeting other parents at the kids' school, getting involved in school activities is key. Some folks prefer to send their kids to international school, and with that, settling in locally takes on a bit of a different context, depending on the situation. Kids from international schools move fairly often, but in some places, locals send their kids to international schools also. So it can be a mixed bag, the international school. But it's not just about school and kids. Learning the language and becoming involved, whether sports, volunteering, art, religious institutions, or work is really key. Not just for the language, but also about becoming integrated into a place. And that's something that sometimes folks need to push themselves a little bit to do because it feels overwhelming. But that's something that the short-term struggle is really worth the long-term gains on that front.
Looking ahead, what trends do you see shaping the future of Americans living abroad? For example, digital nomadism, remote work, dual citizenship issues, changes in global mobility?
I think all of that, absolutely all of those. The more fundamental question is, I think we're seeing the U.S. shifting toward being a country of emigration with an identifiable and ongoing trend of people leaving the country. And that's something that the United States has not historically been. People have always left the United States, as we know, whether it was migrants in the 19th century who were returning home to Italy, to Germany, to elsewhere. And as we know, of course, Americans have been leaving the United States. Estimates right now are around-ish 5 million. And now more and more Americans are leaving. Maybe not in huge numbers, but it's certainly an identifiable ongoing move. I estimated in a piece for The Conversation a little while ago that 1% to 2% of U.S. citizens are currently in the process of setting up a move. And that's about 3 to 5 million people. It's a low percentage, but it's a lot of people. It could double the number of Americans estimated to be living overseas. And I think we're going to see that continue. Americans are moving abroad for many different reasons. Certainly the current political situation, but they're still moving for retirement, for jobs, to be with a partner, and to explore the world. Research I'm involved in shows that exploration remains the number one reason for moving abroad. And I think people are also moving abroad because there's a recognition that Europe and other countries see healthcare as a right, not as a privilege. That kids don't need to have active shooter drills at school. That vacation is normal, that an 80-hour work week is not, and that public transport can be cost effective and get you where you need to go when you need to be there. And those are issues that I think are becoming more visible and are having people think about moving to countries where those are the case. And the other thing is, we know that from migration scholarship, that knowing someone living abroad is a really key factor in a migration decision. So with more and more people moving, that process does tend to take on a life of its own.
Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share?
I mean, mainly that moving abroad is far more than just logistics. Humans are complex creatures, and deciding to move abroad is a big decision. And absolutely, applying for visas and getting healthcare straightened out and all the other logistic elements is a big part of it, but it's not the only or even the most important aspect for long-term success. And the process of settling in is often really challenging. I guess I could say I wear 3 hats. I'm a migration scholar. I'm an American living in Europe for, well, in total well over 30 years. And I'm now a certified personal coach. And those 3 hats enable me to ask powerful, informed, and appropriate questions to folks I work with, whether they're trying to decide whether to move abroad, whether they're in the process, or they're already living abroad and asking themselves some of those questions you raised here today. I've been through visa processes, job applications, bureaucracy in multiple languages, identity crises, and come out on the other side. It is doable. It does take preparation. It does take work. And that's something that when I work with clients, that my certification as a personal coach enables me to draw on my experience, my own lived experience and my professional experience in advising and in formulating powerful questions to ask clients. And folks should feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much for taking the time to chat today.
Thank you, Michelle. It's been a real pleasure. And thank you for having me. And you asked great questions. Thanks.
Thank you. The content of ACA podcasts, including documents and presentations, is made available only for general information purposes. It is not intended and should not be treated as legal, financial, or tax advice. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the views of American Citizens Abroad, Inc. or any affiliated organization. ACA does not warrant the accuracy, completeness, or usefulness of any content or other information. ACA disclaims all liability and responsibility arising from any reliance placed on any content or information by you or any other person. ACA is nonpartisan and does not support any political party or candidate.